Every November, when we're around the Thanksgiving table, we ask each other why we don't eat this exact meal more than once a year. Nothing makes us happier. Thanksgiving has long been my favorite holiday, and in recent years, I've looked for ways to celebrate the spirit of that sacred menu through a different lens. On a holiday centered around turkey, carbs, and fat, I found myself writing down two simple, glorious words. Turkey Biryani. Slow simmered meat with layers of rice, onions, and herbs is the easiest way for me to describe biryani. While it's a dish that has renown for being complicated and prepared mostly for celebrations, biryani is not too crazy once you break it down into a few steps and apply good technique. Step one is to get the marinade on top of the turkey so that it has plenty of time to set up. To make the marinade, I first peeled and then roughly chopped up fresh ginger and turmeric root and dropped them into the cup of a blender. Next, I toasted some chilies. These are mild, deep red Kashmiri chilies, which I then destemmed and roughly chopped before adding them into the blender. Then came an appropriately heavy hand of salt and about 8 to 10 ounces of coconut yogurt. Last is garam masala and a big bunch of freshly chopped sage. By the way, sage and turmeric is a sneaky amazing combination. This all gets blended on high speed until smooth. Next, I grabbed my dark meat turkey and scored all the pieces through both the skin and the flesh to help the marinade work its magic. That got covered and placed in the fridge for 4 hours, but overnight would be even better. Now, while turkey often gets all the fanfare as the centerpiece of Thanksgiving, the heart of biryani is all about the rice. Here, I started with 2 cups of aged dry basmati and washed off the outer layer of starch until the water ran almost clear. Then I let the rice begin to soak in the water for 20 minutes to begin hydrating. In the meantime, I brought 2 quarts of water up to a rolling boil and added half a cup of salt. The idea here is to partially cook the rice during this step, and the rice will cook for only about 5 minutes before draining it all off in a colander and cooling it with cold water to stop the cooking. Set this to the side until you're ready to assemble. So we know biryani is fit for celebratory feasts, right? So it is no stranger to opulence. While onions can feel pretty basic on the surface, once you cook them until they're sweet, salty, golden, and rich, they're on a whole other level. What I made here yields a lot of onions because, well, any extra here can be a side dish on its own or simply some luxurious condiment to have on hand in a pinch. First, I trimmed, peeled, and sliced 5 onions. Then I set my big Dutch oven over a medium-high flame and added a couple of knobs of coconut fat. Traditionally, you would use ghee here, but coconut fat stands in really well as a replacement. Coconut is loaded with a short-chain fatty acid called butyrate that is found in and named for butter. Into the hot coconut fat, I added chopped sage, and once it started to fry, I added in all the sliced onions. I give this a good toss to coat before salting generously. The salt's going to help break down the cell walls of the onion so it begins to shed liquid and shrink. This was not the traditional low and slow 45-minute caramelized onions, nor was it the fast, deep-fried, frizzled onions. This is somewhere in between the two and clocked in at about 20 minutes. With this volume of onions, I had the flame cranked up to max and was stirring regularly to keep the color consistent across the batch. I added in a couple extra dollops of coconut fat 2 to 3 minutes before I turned off the heat to make sure I had plenty of spare sage and onion infused oil to use later. I transferred the onions into a dish and kept the Dutch oven over a low flame to keep it warm for the next step. With the major components all set up, it was time to get the last few ingredients prepared to assemble a biryani for cooking. There's a lot of herbs in this dish, usually cilantro and mint, but for fall time I went a little off script. Here, I swapped in fresh parsley because of its role in the Thanksgiving stuffing that I grew up with. I also used fennel fronds since that anise-flavored aromatic works so well in Indian cuisine. I chopped up the fennel bolt to cook along with the meat and to lend some extra depth to the curry. Like any good celebratory meal, biryani doesn't skimp on the lily gilding. The last flourish before the assembled dish finishes cooking typically calls for the inclusion of saffron. I took a pinch of saffron threads and roughly ground them with a mortar and pestle, And then I added some warm water to let it bloom until water became a golden amber color, which is about 5 minutes or so. With the components all in place, it was time to assemble this thing. So while we all have an opinion on white or dark meat at Thanksgiving, there's really only one choice for this dish. Dark meat simply works best in biryani because it's more forgiving of a longer cooking time and requires less precise timing than white meat does. Before adding the marinated turkey here, I started by building the foundation for the curry. Into our seasoned Dutch oven, I added another knob of coconut fat. Once melted and hot, I added in the spices. First 3 cloves, then a half teaspoon of cumin seeds, then 3 to 4 cardamom pods, a small stick of cinnamon, and a couple of bay leaves. I fried those for just under a minute and added in the turkey. By the way, don't go longer than a minute or else some of those, the compounds in those spices are going to go bitter. You don't want that. The aim here isn't to crisp the skin or really develop caramelization on the meat, but rather it's to bloom the spices in the marinade by cooking them in hot fat. I added the rest of the salty marinade into the pot and let that all cook for about 5 minutes before flipping the meat to the other side and repeating the process. After both sides have been exposed to the hot oil, I added in a couple of cups of water, brought everything up to a boil, and added in the chopped fennel bulb. I like to think of this as both building a turkey stock and a turkey gravy all at the same time. Once the fennel was more or less submerged, I put on the lid to the pot and let this braise for 1 hour. In hindsight, I probably could have given this another 30 minutes of cooking time for an even more tender turkey, but 1 hour still yielded a really great result. The next part I think is the most fun because it's the culmination of all that prep work up to this point. The base layer of this biryani is the braised turkey and sauce. On top of this, I sprinkled a handful of herbs and added some of those sweet onions. I covered all of that with a layer of part-cooked basmati, then went another layer of herbs and onions, then more basmati, more onions, and herbs. For the final flourish, I drizzled the saffron water along the top, staining the rice and creating striations of intense yellow. Next, I added a layer of foil to make a tight seal that traps in steam, which finishes cooking the rice. This was secured in place with a heavy lid before I put the whole thing in a preheated oven at 350 degrees and let it cook for 20 minutes. Finally, I let it rest for 5 minutes more, and then it was time to plate. Opening a finished biryani is an experience that these visuals simply can't fully convey. A major component that you're missing here on the video, in particular when you first rip off the foil, is the insanely fragrant aromas that come wafting out of this pot. That floral saffron and basmati hits you first, then the chili and spices, and then the slow simmered meat. The smell of the kitchen when making biryani fills a hole in your heart that you never knew you had. And I think I'm understating it. There's white rice, there's yellow rice, there's flecks of green herbs. I gave the basmati a quick fluff and pulled out the platter to plate this up family style. I piled on the rice and unearthed those turkey legs to top off this centerpiece. Inside the pot, there was still enough to feed a small country. The next best thing after Thanksgiving dinner is, of course, Thanksgiving leftovers. And that's turkey biryani. I think it's only appropriate here to extend my huge thanks to everyone who's been watching these videos and is subscribed to the channel. I took a little time off after the summer to regroup here and kickstart a new Indian menu. I'll be cooking this for the rest of the fall and into the winter, so stick around and subscribe to the channel to check out what comes next. For some more Thanksgiving recipes to round out the table, check out this video of sides that go along with this biryani. Thanks again, everyone. I'm going to see you all next time. Bye now.